Christopher, Andy, and Wendy are here. Is anybody here that I didn't call that's on the working group? Okay. So it is 1:02. It looks like recording and transcription have started. This is the afternoon, the 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock portion of the working group's meeting on March 24th. This is the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont. My name is Catherine Delnau. I am the state librarian, and welcome back to everyone. I hope you take a good break before we dive into the afternoon portion of our agenda. The first thing up is housekeeping. So I just want to share some information and work with you on some stuff. Today, I'm going to share a little bit more from the Senate Committee on Education topic. Talk about the upcoming VISLA and VLA combined conference, and talk about report writing. So earlier this morning, I shared that I went to testify to the Senate Committee on Education on March 15th. They had some proposed changes to the language in the Bill 133, an act related to miscellaneous changes to education law. Initially, they were going to focus more tightly on firearm safety in libraries, but they have expanded that language to talk about adequate public safety protections in libraries. While I was there, given the fact that we have such a huge scope that everybody keeps noticing, the giant expansive scope that we have, I did something that I think Kelly McCagg had suggested at one point, which was just simply ask for more time. You can't get it if you don't ask. So I asked for an extension until March of 2024. The senators on the Committee on Education seemed open to providing us with more time to write our report, but they want us to complete the report a little bit earlier than March so that they would be well positioned to respond to any recommendations that we make in the 2023-2024 legislative session. So for that reason, they changed the language in the bill, Senate Bill 133, so that it currently reads that we would submit our report on or before December 20th, 2023. So we basically got a month and a half extension if this language gets through the rest of the process. So, this is Senate Committee on Education was the originator, then it goes to the House, and then the governor would need to sign the changes. So it's not a done deal, but it's somewhat possible that we would get a little bit of extra time to write our report. My sense is that we're grateful for any extra time we can get our hands on. So that is what I'm thinking. And it's still, for those of us who celebrate holidays at the end of December, it still would mean that we got to put it out of our minds before that. My apologies to those of us who celebrate holidays earlier in December, or for all of us who celebrate well, for many people who celebrate holidays in November. So I just wanted to share that update. I'll keep you posted. I do think that in order to add the topic of public safety, unfortunately, we have to add another meeting on public safety. And I'd like to recommend that we add that meeting on August 25th. We get into an issue, we're already in an issue where when we do the meetings too close to each other, if we don't close testimony, we can't get the next testimony without confusing everybody. And we just saw this happen this week where we wanted to put out the call for testimony on intellectual freedom, but because I didn't get enough testimony initially in the original time frame, we had to extend, and then we're kind of blurring messages. We're saying we're meeting on Friday on this topic. Oh, and tell us about this topic for 2 months from now. It gets a little bit messy. So my preference as the kind of ringleader here is to keep the meeting spaced out. And I recognize maybe everybody won't be able to come because I imagine those of you who work in public libraries will be at the end of August or at some point in August breathing a sigh of relief that summer reading is over and taking a break, well deserved. But that's my proposal. So I'll pause there. And Jeanette, do you have your hand up? You have ideas?
Well, I just think we're talking about timelines here. I just wanted to be official that I will no longer be working in a public library after July the 1st. I don't know how that would impact the committee, but just throwing it out there.
Well, if you're willing to continue on, we're willing to keep you. We would love to keep you. Because you've been with us for this whole time and the report writing will continue and your years of experience in public libraries will still inform this. And I don't think we need to replace you. That would be wacky. So if you're open to continuing on, Jeanette, that would be fine. And if you're not at work, then please apply for the per diems because then we can at least give you a slight compensation for your participation.
My retirement plan.
You're in trouble if that's your retirement plan.
Yeah, $50 per diem.
Okay, anyway, just wanted to put all the cards on the table there and be official.
Congratulations. Take me with you on retirement. I would love to retire one day. Oh, Christopher.
Yeah, Kathy, I'm not anywhere near as dramatic as Jeanette, but it does seem weird to me to say I will be gone this summer on sabbatical for 2 months from June 15th to roughly August 15th. So meetings that happen during that time I won't be at, but I'll be back.
You'll be back for the 25th, though.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good reason to do it at the end of August. Okay. Thanks, Christopher.
Oh, that's actually a good point. I'm out of commission from mid-June to mid-July for the same reason.
Okay.
If that matters.
Well, I'm not planning on meeting in June because I would like to also take vacation. And I was looking at June because the options were add something in June and potentially mean that like I don't get to take a vacation again for more than 6 months, which seems crazy. So I was hoping to take some time in the month of June off. So it would be very hard to just keep going through for me. So I didn't even suggest that date. That was part of why I picked August. Seems like I chose the right direction. Okay. So if everybody's okay, I'll add a special meeting to the calendar on the topic of public safety on August 25th. And if somebody can't be here because they're on sabbatical or they have a vacation scheduled, we don't all have to be at every single meeting. It's great if we can be, but anybody who misses a meeting can catch up on the meeting by watching the video later on and reading the minutes.
I have to say, August the 25th is up in the air for me. It may or may not work. My daughter's giving birth just around that time, so guess where I will be at that point? Not here.
Understood. Well, we'll bear that. Well, I feel like birth is a pretty important milestone and sort of outweighs commitments to the working group. So Wendy, congratulations. That's exciting.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're gonna add the August 25th meeting. I'll keep you posted on developments with the legislation. It seems like an important topic to consider in light of the conversations we've had today anyway, to have a purposeful discussion of that. And it's certainly one that is very important to library staff that we hear from. Oh my gosh, and Karen just had a fire alarm, which is super apropos.
Oh, no.
Holy moly. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to touch in on is the upcoming VLA VISLA conference. And if anybody has looked at the agenda for that conference, you might notice that there's a working group activity going on at the conference. Let me explain what's happening, and please listen very carefully to what I say because it is a little bit nuanced. So it is not a working group meeting. There is no expectation that anybody on the working group be at this activity. In fact, unless you are a presenter, please do not come to the activity. Because it is not a meeting, It is an outreach activity by a couple of members of the group to this key group of constituents. It's not open to the public. So it cannot become a meeting. We don't want enough of us showing up in the room that it suddenly tips into becoming a meeting. It's specifically an outreach session, and those who do outreach efforts in that vein of standing in the room and talking about what we've been doing and maybe getting people to write testimony and maybe getting them to do some dot voting on different topics of interest. Those of us who are doing that will then report back to the committee, to the working group later on. And that is totally okay with open meeting law. That type of outreach is totally okay. Along the same lines, it was recommended, one of the recommendations that I heard when I was at a VLA meeting recently was maybe we could do some outreach to the academic libraries at one of their meetings. So that might be something that our academic librarians and maybe I set up, and then we report back to the working group about what they thought, or, just that we did it. But it wouldn't become, we don't want it to become a meeting, an extra meeting. We already have enough meetings without adding more meetings and adding more elements and more confusion. And so please, unless I've talked to you and you are planning to present with me, which at this point is, I think, Kelly and Karen. I think those two of you are probably knowing that I owe you an email explaining what the heck we're doing, which I'll get to next week after this meeting is done. Unless you're Kelly or Karen or me, don't walk through the door, because I don't want to be a bouncer. Like, I don't want to have to kick you out, but I will. Because I also don't want to fine. Does that make sense?
Good for you.
Okay.
Okay. But you might wonder, well, what can I do? I'm a working group member. I should be doing stuff with the public. And I'm going to be at the VLA conference. Can I see a show of hands for who's going to be at the VLA conference? Maybe show me your hand with the hand raise function. That'll be easiest if you can do that. Wendy, Kelly, Karen, anybody else? Just the three of you? I was hoping more of you would be there.
I'm still not going out in groups.
Yeah, it's okay. That's perfectly fine. And understandable. Well, the department has set up, we've sponsored a table for the working group. So I was thinking we would put some materials on the table. For those people who will be at the conference, we can, I'll email you I'll email everybody to share a link so that if you're going to be at the conference, you could potentially sign up for like an hour standing there with the stuff, so that if people come by and want to hear what we're up to, you can just give them a spiel and find out what they're interested in. It can be a pretty self-serve table as well. We can just do some dot voting and kind of trust that they can handle it. It'll be great. Whatever happens, it'll be great. So I'll share out a little sign up sheet, but it looks like it's pretty few of us who will be available to do that activity. Okay, so we got through oh, Kelly.
I just wanted to let you know, we are almost maxed out on registration at 3.
Oops, hold on. I think I just muted Kelly by accident. Kelly, I muted you. I clicked something. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to let you know that we are almost maxed out at registration at 350. So there will be a fair number of people there. So it is a good outreach opportunity.
Great.
Okay. That's great. And we have a really long outreach session planned, Kelly and Karen, and I'm thinking we're probably going to abbreviate it so that we're not standing there for hours and hours and hours and hours in the room. Okay. So you all of the members of the working group, thank you. We actually got everybody responding to the topic writing survey. Each and every one of you responded, and all of your responses were perfectly reasonable and perfectly kind of what I expected. And I'm gonna take a moment and share my screen. I made a little spreadsheet. because we have some, can you see the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Color coded. Okay.
It's
So
kind
a
of
few of
small
the-
and hard. It's hard to read. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's.
Read it.
Is
It's
it?
too
Okay, let
small.
me
Can
try
you make it
again.
bigger?
Yeah, you know what it is? It's that it's on my, I have one screen that goes portrait that I look at spreadsheets on, and it looks great to me, but it looks terrible to you, is what I've noticed. Hold on, let me try to make this bigger on my other monitor and then share my screen, share the other screen.
Much better.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so if there's something that's in green, it means that that was somebody's top choice and nobody else wanted the thing. So Andy, who emailed me about social services, Andy, it's like your winner chicken dinner moment. Because look, there you are. You're the only one who really wants that as a top choice.
So that means I get to do it by myself?
Well, the idea right now is we're having a primary person on each of them. And we can talk about what else to do. We can look at this in other directions. So the idea was initially my idea was that we would just have one person do each topic, but that we would potentially pair them with the expert from the department who presented. So let me just go through what the working group interests were, because I think we do need a primary lead on it, and then we can talk about how we do other stuff. And I want to say this isn't an official assignment. It's just you're the primary lead. So collections, Jeanette, that looked like you're kind of in the same boat that Andy's in, where you're the most interested, and it doesn't mean nobody else showed any interest. It just means that like your top interest is reflected here. Does that make sense?
Yes, but did you say we were all going to be paired with a staff member?
That seems like a possibility, yes.
Okay, because I didn't know if you were going to announce those pairings at this point.
I'm working on all of it still, but probably for collections, it would likely be Lauren Kelly. Karen McCullough, you had indicated a top interest in technology, and nobody else indicated a top interest in technology. And Josh is who usually works on technology in our team. Maria Avery, you indicated a couple of top choices, I think maybe, or no, Maria, you indicated staffing was your top choice and nobody else had indicated that. And so I slotted you in as the lead for that one.
Awesome. That's great. I also just want to say that I am happy to be a support person on most of these things too. So if we're looking
Great.
for, partners for other people, I'm happy to do that too.
Okay, awesome. So those four are the easiest to resolve. Then we get into the yellow zone. The yellow zone is where we have multiple people who all have a top choice. And unfortunately, Susan's not here right now. But let's just talk about what we have. I mean, I figure if somebody has a top choice and we give them one of them, they'll probably be happy. And not everybody gets their top choice, and that just happens. So we'll see how it goes. But the top choices where we have two or more people who have expressed interest in something as their top choice, those are listed for the topics of continuing education, inclusive services, intellectual freedom, and library structures and organizations. The things down lower in the screen in this 13 through 15 range, programming, facilities, and emergency preparedness, those are orange because nobody had these as a top choice. People had them as some interest topic. So first we're going to deal with the ones where we've got multiple people who are basically going to like arm wrestle it out. And so we can Rochambeau, you can make deals. I don't know how to do it. So let's just talk. So for continuing education, Denise, Wendy, and one thing I should say before we start this, top choice yellow people. If you see something down below that you're actually like cool with, Like you would be fine with programming, but you're in continuing education. Like, tell me now, because we could just resolve that issue at this moment. Or if somebody doesn't mind doing two, tell me now. As if somebody doesn't has enough capacity to do two leads, that's fine too.
Can you explain again what the obligations are for somebody who's a lead?
Yes, and please accept my apologies because in my little notes that I wrote out, I actually have a whole description and I got so excited about the spreadsheet that I forgot to read that. So let me now, okay, now I will read what I prepared. So we've talked about having our report being broken into topics, just like our meetings have focused on specific topics. Each of the topics within our full report are going to begin with a subject overview, then move to a summary of what we heard from the community, both in written and oral form, and then we'll conclude with the working group's recommendations on that subject. So what you should know is that the consultants in the Department of Libraries who you've seen present on different topics, they've been busy writing draft reports on the topics that you've heard from them about. So we have a programming draft report, technology, staffing, continuing education for library staff, continuing education for library trustees, and inclusive services. Those draft reports have been written. I think staffing is still on its way, but it's in progress. Those reports are going to actually, yeah, we still need staffing. Those reports are going to provide an overview of the data that's available to the department. So what you heard, those data sets that Josh helps everybody with. And then if possible, if we have national data, then the report frames the Vermont situation, the status of that topic in libraries in Vermont within the broader national perspective. So each of those reports is going to serve as the initial portion of the full subject report. So it'll be like there's technology, and it's going to start out with a thing that Josh wrote about the summary of the information, that the data, and then it would move to Karen's overview on what we heard from the community, include some salient quotes, have some recommendations that the group agreed on. Does that make sense? So if you're the lead, you're kind of moving that along through the process. It's really important, and I want to say this because I know many of us are librarians, and many of us like doing additional stuff.
No.
We don't want you to, I don't want you to do that, because then you would be doing independent research that didn't match with what the working group heard, and you could get to a very different conclusion, and the whole working group could be like kind of lost when you come back to present. So it's important to note that working group members are not being asked to do additional surveys, additional focus groups, or additional research on the topic. Your charge is really specific. You're going to develop a high-level summary of what we heard from the community members who took time to share their written and oral comments with us, and what we heard from experts and specific presenters who joined us at our meetings. Does that make some sense? So there's no
And
need to share
Yeah.
out more questions with the community or anything like that.
Will the recommendations then come from all of us combined? Are we going to go through each topic and come up with recommendations, or are there smaller groups that are going to be proposing recommendations to us as a larger committee?
We've done a lot of recommendation considering already, even though you might not realize it. So at the end of each topic for recent meetings, we've talked about recommendations. We also had that catch-up meeting on September 23rd, where we talked about recommendations. And for some of the topics that we've sort of begun but not finished, like staffing, after we get the staffing survey for public libraries, we'll have more opportunity to talk about recommendations on staffing there. So the general idea is there are probably some seeds of ideas of recommendations, and that you as the working group member could flesh them out a little bit to be what you think the consensus was during the conversation. And then you would bring those back to the working group and we would look at them and consider them. Does that sound kind of reasonable? So everybody would have some writing to do, but it wouldn't be more than like 5 or 6 pages of writing total. So it's sort of chunking it so that we're all doing it, because the other option where I was gonna write it all, I think I might have died. So this was sort of what we talked about in December, as far as what we thought was probably gonna work.
Kathy.
Uh-huh.
I'll just dive in and say, my name appears there twice under intellectual freedom and programming. And I would be more than happy to partner with Kelly or defer to Kelly on intellectual freedom and take on the programming one. If that is the will of the group, that would be fine with me. I am doing a bunch of work to help do outreach on intellectual freedom, but that doesn't mean that I need to write that piece. I don't feel ownership over that or a stake in the ground about it. So if it helps to get the ball rolling of people volunteering, I would be happy to go to either one.
Okay. So this could turn into, this could also, I'm gonna mark this one like you're also happy to go over here, so I turned it yellow. Thoughts from other folks. Denise, do you wanna, let's see, Denise, Wendy, and then Susan's not here. Denise, you had indicated interest in library structures and also in continuing education, and so had Susan. And then Wendy, you were interested in continuing education, but also had some interest in emergency preparedness.
I don't feel like territorial about any of this, so
Okay.
whatever might be left over, I'm okay working on. If Wendy has, Wendy, what do you think? What do you really want to do?
Actually, this is all happening during the term. And so writing basically another term paper is going to be filling my life quite well, which is why I put the top choice as continuing education, because I thought that it would be more straightforward to actually achieve, and therefore making my life a heck of a lot easier. But obviously Susan's also in there, so I can't speak for her. I'm not sure if I know what you want me to say. I don't think I can actually offer to do emergency preparedness. I don't think I can do that one.
Okay. Well, how about we put you on continuing education, since Denise has some flexibility? Is that okay, Denise?
Yeah.
And then Susan's not here, but I think she'll probably be okay with that. Then when we look at organizations and structures, well, I see Kelly's hand is up too. Kelly?
I was actually going to defer to Christopher, because I know he does have more experience with intellectual freedom. But I'm happy to partner with him. But that's actually what I was going to say, is that I know he has more experience than I do. So I was going to defer to him. So
Could I interest you in
and
another
I
one?
have another top choice as well.
What's your other top choice?
Inclusive services, yeah.
My other top choice is inclusive services.
Okay. Sorry if I missed that.
No, it's there.
Oh, it's there.
So the
I just didn't see it. Okay. Okay. Let's see. So if we do, let's turn Christopher back. Let's turn Christopher. How about we do Christopher for intellectual freedom, because he's helping to organize the speakers. Is Meg here? I'm gonna gray out Andy from programming because he's already got one. Uh-oh, we've got some weird noises. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna gray out Christopher because he's already got one. So a question for, I guess, it's hard to know what to do when Meg's not here and Susan's not here, because it feels like we're just kind of picking a thing and sticking them on it.
Maybe Susan and I could, even do it together. Like she and I could reach out to each other. The library structures.
Mhm. I'm just wondering, are we going to end up without somebody for one of them? We also have to add safety, right? Public safety,
Oh.
which we didn't survey anybody about because we didn't know it was a thing yet. Okay. I had an idea that I could do programming. I was initially assigning myself programming and then I unassigned myself programming and then I thought I could be assigned programming again. I'm a little bit worried because I feel like I need to take all of them and make the tone consistent. And like, if I take one on, that might be difficult. Let's see. So I guess a question, Denise, is maybe if you're okay doing programming, could you do programming and then we give Susan library structures and then we spread us all out as the lead more?
I guess so. I mean, programming's interesting to me. I know that it's
Oh,
going
but
to
it's
be,
not here.
yeah, it's going to be primarily programming that I'm not really familiar with other than, but if I'm just
Yeah.
summarizing, but not working in public libraries or school media, yeah, I'll be just, I mean, which is probably fine, right? I'm just going to take what we've already collected and
You know what? I'm
I
gonna,
think it would be better.
well,
I mean, if you don't have a dog in the fight, it might be easier not to put your own feelings while
you know
you're
what though?
summarizing.
I feel like I did stuff on this already a while ago, and maybe I should just finish it because there was this one idea that was that like I could do, I don't want people to wait for mine, but like I could make if I can get it done fairly quickly, I could make like a template kind of one, taking the programming data and then just a brief summary. So why don't we put, because I think there's an extent to which what you're saying makes sense, Denise, because it's sort of hard to, I don't know, if that is, the public library is where most of the programming was taking place. Okay, so I'll do this one. Inclusive services, Meg's not here either, right? Meg looks like she's here, but she's not here. Emergency preparedness. We're running into areas where we need to assign people to is the other issue. And if we consider public safety part of emergency preparedness or not, that's also another thing to consider. Maybe we should. Then we only have one. But they're summarizing a lot because that's like it's a meeting and a half. For right now, let's say that we've determined the lead for continuing education, social services, staffing, technology, and collections, intellectual freedom, and programming. And then I think we need to sort things out a little bit further with library structures and organization, but it seems, and we need to do something with facilities, and we need to do something with emergency preparedness, including public safety. So I think on the ones that we have 2 yellows for, I'll reach out to those individuals and see, or actually, Kelly, if you can reach out to Meg, because you're here and she's not, and the 2 of you kind of sort that out. And then whoever doesn't take one will take one of these others. Does that make sense? And the same with Denise and Susan.
So are we definitely splitting up?
I think we should
I-
split them up so we get the right number because otherwise we don't have one lead and then I don't have one person to email with.
Mhm.
And this sounds a little bit goofy, but I need to make sure that I think that the lead on each topic could reach out to other individuals like informally. I think that would be okay.
What if I'll take facilities.
Okay,
I kind of remember some of the, I kind of remember that meeting when we were talking about it.
okay, great. Hold on, I've lost my mouse. There it is. Okay, awesome. Oh no, I just did the wrong thing. This one. I just did everything wrong. Hold on. Susan Green. Okay, so we're turning things different colors. Denise. So right now we just have to sort out inclusive services, and whoever doesn't do inclusive services, Meg or Kelly, is gonna do emergency preparedness. Jeanette?
Don't shoot me on this one, but
Okay, we
um,
won't do anything like that to anyone ever.
doing
but-
collections here. I'm thinking that had our discussions on collections been after major news events with lots and lots of public comment on, it certainly would have been covered. But because of timing, the gutting of our state college libraries was never discussed with the working group. I would think we would be remiss to not either accept some direct testimony, used some of the published comments, or somehow include that in our report when, had the timing been different, it certainly would have been part of it.
I have two thoughts, and then we should actually put a pin in it and come back afterward and pick it up again, because I just noticed what time it is. Our working group charge is general, not specific to investigate particular issues. So I think for the collections topic, it's absolutely like, for what you need to do right now, I think summarizing what took place already is gonna be good. There is the topic of intellectual freedom, which may pertain in some ways to the reduction in available resources. That is coming up in April. Christopher, I just sent you an email with the forwarded message. I just put it out to the whole community. I waited till we were halfway through today's meeting because I didn't want to get confused with all the dueling testimony. I expect we may hear some things in the intellectual freedom session, or may get written comment on intellectual freedom about, I mean, intellectual freedom, I posed it as relevant to collections, programming, and technology because of the digitization of things.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Denise?
So I don't know, I mean, you brought up the recent decisions on the state college system, and I don't know if this fits anywhere, but we've been talking about it because we work at a university library, and part of what we see is the problem was so I want to say assessment, because the data that was pointed to in order to support the decision, and we feel is somewhat faulty. And in the university libraries, we often talk about what data should we be collecting to tell our story to administration or those people who fund us or make those decisions. And I don't know if there's a way to incorporate some of that in what we're talking about, but what data do we collect? What is really important to the constituencies that we support and who support us? And part of what we felt happened in that case was that data wasn't, the right data wasn't being either collected or transcribed into the story that would have made sense to administration or to the state legislature.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've really talked about assessment at all within our
I have a
categories.
thought, which is that it might be a good idea for someone from the group of stakeholders that you represent, Denise, maybe from VCAL. We haven't heard from VCAL at all, to prepare some sort of statement that could be shared in the intellectual freedom. Like, when we're making collection development decisions, this is how we do it. Maybe that's a way to pull it in.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about like in our university system, I've been talking to colleagues recently. By understanding what are the priorities of the people who fund us. So what are the provost's priorities? What are the president's priorities? And then tying what we do to those priorities. So it's not how many books do you circulate or how many people come into the library or how we make our decisions. It's you care about student retention. Well, here's what we are doing that aligns with that. So I don't know if as libraries in general, we tell our stories in that way so that they align with the priorities of our constituencies. And I don't know if there's room for that in this particular exercise that we are involved in right now. Maybe that's just something for us all to talk about off on the side or at a conference or something else.
Well, it seems like it may be relevant. It's just a matter of how do we get it, where do we fit it with what we have left? Like it might have fit best on collections day. And we didn't think it wasn't thought of on collections day. And that's happening. We're seeing some of that. So Denise, maybe if you could kind of just summarize what you're thinking of, like what should be included in that. And then you and I could do an offline and talk it through a little bit. And then we can try to figure out where it fits best. I'm a little bit worried because we're getting off. I've usually been really good with the agenda. But Josh is with us, but he's not going to go next. We're going to jump to our 145 person who I see on our screen. Randall Smathers is here from Rutland. And before we jump, I see Christopher's hand. So very quickly, Christopher's going to say, we have 2 minutes before Randall, so I think we can do it. Oh, Christopher, but you're muted.
5-second sentence. I just want to remind working group members that working group members can submit their own testimony. And so when you get the invitation from Kathy, Kathy and I are setting up the agenda for Intellectual Freedom Day. Please, if you want to testify, you should let us know. And would love to hear from the academic librarians. And Denise, if you want to help get a couple more people onto that day, would love that help.
Yeah, and toward that, if there's a topic you've missed, for example, collections, maybe Denise, the thing to do is to develop a statement on collections and what should be considered. And then we put that into the testimony page. And then it can be, because we're accepting all the testimony on a rolling basis. So we could also try to get a time for Q&A with the group, but maybe that's an initial thought, is just get something together for that on that topic.
Yeah, maybe I'll do that. For me, I'm thinking services, so maybe it fits better with programming.
Yeah, the thing that's
From the point of view that I'm coming from, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the term programming means different things in our different universes. And in libraries, typically, in public libraries, typically programming is like you're in a program room or you're in the library and there's somebody presenting something. And I think programming in the state library context is a little different. Like one of our programs is different, and like a grant program is a program. And for you all, your programming in the academic means something else. So we have to make sure that we define those well, because that was confusing even in the school library, public library realm with programming. Okay, it looks like Susan rejoined us, which is great. And Randall Smathers is now here, and he is going to, we're going to turn it over to him for the next about 10 minutes to share with us, and then we'll do 5 minutes of Q&A after he shares his perspectives and comments on the topic of social services. Thanks, Randall.
And I'm unmuted, yay. So thanks for taking the time with me today. I did listen in as much as I could this morning, which unfortunately wasn't the whole thing, but there was a comment that social services and emergency preparedness have a lot of crossover, and I would absolutely support that. And I'm just going to summarize my testimony. It's written, you folks are all literate. So just some kind of crisis points that tend to arise for us. First is social services is such a broad topic because, as I point out, most of the routine functions we serve at the help desk are social service requests. They are requests for tax forms. They are requests for The DMV changed how it hands out temporary plates. The hospital sends people out with information. And so for each of these people, we're looking at it as a print job or a technology question, and they're looking at it as how they need to get something done that may be critical in their day-to-day lives. So where does social services start and end? At one end of the conversation. And then the other one, I just caught part of the conversation this morning about active shooting. We have done active shooting training. We anticipate doing active shooting training again. There is one person in the state of Vermont that we have found who is able to come to our library and do active shooting training for us, and he is a volunteer. The local PD are willing to help, but they're overworked and understaffed, and currently they do not have the certification they need because during COVID, they didn't do public training. And so because they're out of practice, they need to be recertified as trainers. And until they get that recertification, they can't come and train us on self-defense. So even when there's a will, and there's a very strong will in this library to work on kind of the big picture pieces, even when there's a will, often there are, I would say, inadvertent bureaucratic delays. But I really want to drill in on one or two of the examples I gave. The one young lady who has been coming here for over a decade. She's always been in a state of crisis. The last time she came in, she was inconsolable, wailing at the top of her lungs. Nobody could get anything else done in the library because she was just in that condition. And I tried to work with her, and I couldn't work with her. I couldn't get anything out of her except she had nothing to live for. We called the PD. Why do we call the PD? Because literally, I cannot make the point too many times, we have called crisis intervention for over a decade, and we've had 2 responses, which is unacceptable at every level. So we called the PD. They said, oh, you should call Rutland Mental Health. We've never had a member of Rutland Mental Health come out except once, so we called them. They said, oh, you should call crisis intervention, so we called crisis intervention. Meanwhile, I've got a patient sitting at a computer, crying at the top of her lungs, disrupting the entire library. Crisis intervention actually responded, which was fabulous. Never happened before, but a whole range of things broke for us that day that are not common occurrences for us, and they really should be. Crisis intervention responded. That shouldn't be a surprise. And I know how overworked they are, but we're not trained in this stuff. We're trained in how to run a library, not how to intervene in somebody's life when they're a mentally disturbed individual and have been for many years, and B, in an absolute point of existential crisis. There should be better support than hopefully the librarian can pick it up. Then when the person from crisis intervention showed up, she didn't play the HIPAA 2-step. I cannot tell you how many times we've called the police, we've told them who the individual is because they're logged into one of our computers, so we know who they are. We provide any background information the police need. In many cases, we've worked with the individual for years and years, sometimes decades. The police show up, they say, okay, we've got it. And then we say, okay, what's the next step? We can't tell you that. Well, what's the next step? Well, we can't tell you because HIPAA. So when it comes to this is what works for this individual, even though we've been relied on to get to that point, when there's an actual solution, the librarian is excluded from it because we're not considered part of the professional solution. This has got to the point numerous times of us calling, actually getting a hold of somebody in mental health and saying, okay, here's the person, here's the individual, I know you've worked with them in the past, and them saying, we can either confirm or deny whether that person has ever been involved with Rutland Mental Health. Which puts all the emphasis back on my staff. And again, we're not trained in this. And so that's really the first big systemic breakdown that I think we need to talk about is just communication and where we're included and where we're not. And I understand that every library in the state is different on this because we are on everything else. And I heard with much interest from our very northeast corner this morning and all the services that she provides. We're in a completely different situation. The fire department is literally 1 block that way, and the police department is literally 5 blocks that way, and rental mental health is 3.5 blocks that way. And I can't get anybody to come out to the library. And when they do come out to the library, I can't get them to treat us as if we're part of a professional team trying to solve the problem. The minute they show up, we're amateur hour. And this is where it crosses over into safety and emergency preparedness. Another really brief anecdote, had a gentleman, he was in here for about 6 months. He was in here 4 to 5 days a week, usually not too disruptive, a little bit of odd behavior, and was most easily identified as he always carried a 2-liter bottle of orange soda with him that he would consume while he was sitting in the library. 1 week he started to get disruptive, and so I had to intervene with him 2 or 3 times. And then finally we called the police for a no trespass. And it was a routine no trespass. Sir, you have to leave. No, I won't leave. We've got to call the police. I don't care. I'm not leaving. I'm trying to get this done. My staff has called the police. We finally get him out of the building. He's standing on the front steps. I go out to see how things are happening. And there are 9 police officers there, including the chief and the shift supervisor. And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, we know this guy. He's really dangerous. And I've been working with this guy. My staff's been working with this guy for months. And it turns out that he has a problem with authority, and he's put 2 cops in hospital. We need support. We need people to take this seriously. Either Mary Danko or I are going to have someone die in our library because we don't have support. This is broken. That's my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall. I appreciate your sharing with us and the concerns that you've raised. I'm going to turn it over to members of the working group if you have questions for Randall. Or comments. Andy Golubov?
I'm sorry for getting emotional, but
don't
somebody's gonna
apologize for
die.
that. That's not something to apologize for here. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, thank you, Randall, and don't worry about that. My question for you is, since part of the job of this working group is recommendations, right? What are some solutions that you see that could make things better, as you see it?
Have at the state level the recognition that libraries, and we might have to go through special training for this, but that libraries are part of the intervention team. We've had all sorts of people come in and out of here who have been identified as needing, once they get into the mental health system, they need really, really careful work, and or they have been arrested for violent crimes, and we don't know who they are, and we can't get that information. So if I have to put a half dozen staff members through a training so that we are no longer considered unworthy to be part of the actual solution, like that's the gap that the state could really, really fill, is us and Fletcher and whoever else needs it let us train our staffs, let us be part of it so that we don't get abandoned. Because that's what's happening right now. We're getting abandoned.
Okay, thank you, Randall. One quick follow-up just to see, I can imagine a situation, this is not my field, right? I'm just a humble folklorist, where maybe one staff member could be designated. Like, would something like that be adequate for what you're seeing in Rutland?
Well, we'd need 3 or 4 people trained because we're open 55 hours a week and holidays and whatnot. It might even be the admin team. It might be selected staff members. I do know having the PD come through hasn't worked. We've been told over and over again that just call, they'll show up. I had a staff member stalked. We called the PD, they didn't show up. That hurt. And then an officer did come through. We were having another problem with drug use in the lobby restroom. And an officer came through and he said, oh yeah, let's see, last time I was through here was before COVID. So yeah, make us part of that, get us in so that we know what's going on. And it doesn't have to be everybody. I don't want all my cert clerks. I don't want my pages. I want people who are in charge of the building to have the tools to keep people safe.
Okay, thank you, Randall.
Sorry for the long answer. Yes.
Kelly?
Thank you, Randall, for coming to speak. I did want to volunteer to take on the emergency preparedness safety topic. You inspired me, Randall, to volunteer for that. But I also wanted to ask, in Rutland, sorry for the noises my dog's making with this toy. Do you guys have like regular department like head meetings where, you're meeting with like, the chief of police and the chief from the fire department and stuff like that, where, you guys are meeting regularly, like not one-on-one, but, in a group like that where you have a working relationship?
We do not, we're not a municipal.
I know that. Yeah.
I have a neighbor who shall remain unnamed, who has in the past been able to warn me about some of the worst threats to our safety, but that requires on having him come through the building so that he knows who's here.
Okay.
But
The reason why
I have tried to reach out to the chief, and I've been assured that it is the single least efficient way to get stuff done, because he's a real nice person and he's working really hard, but he doesn't know what's happening on the street to the level of the street officers.
Right.
So I did everything down to bribing the beat cop that he could have a warm restroom and a cookie if he would just come through the library. And I just haven't been able to get anybody in here.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your coming today, Randall, and please feel free to continue to stay with us if you're able. We've got Charlotte, I'm so confused. We've got Margaret Woodruff from Charlotte who's up next. But I do want to just say thank you, Randall, and thanks for sharing those comments with us. We are likely adding a separate meeting on, or we decided we're adding a separate meeting on public safety in general at our August meeting. So some of what you shared today is in that zone where social services unmet turn into public safety concerns. So there is this overlap between emergency preparedness, social services, public safety. They're all sort of, there's an enmeshment that I want to just recognize. And thank you.
And thanks again for your time, folks.
Of course. And now we'll turn it over to Margaret. Margaret, you might have heard your ears, you might have felt your ears. Is it ears buzzing? What do ears do when people talk about you when you're not present? Earlier today, we heard from Matt, I just forgot his name. Matt Ballerman of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, and he was
Oh,
talking about
awesome.
you this morning in a really positive way. So we let him know that you would be joining us this afternoon, and here you are. So welcome.
Thanks, and I'm sorry I have not been able, we had a lot going on here today, so I've been in and out intermittently, but glad to be here and look forward to catching up on the notes. And I feel coming on the heels of the experiences of the librarians in Rutland, we have a very different set of experiences in Charlotte, and I'm going to share some things from the notes that I presented, but I did want to say that I feel like it is really important, this idea of public safety and staff safety and crisis intervention. I mean, even here in Charlotte, we've had a few instances of hitchhikers coming off of Route 7, people sort of showing up at the library because it's the place you go. We don't have a police department or anything, so it's the place you go if you need help, and yet we don't feel quite prepared to help these people. So I would be really interested in training or learning opportunities for library staff could get fleshed out, and how it could, given the different kinds of libraries we have in our state, how that can be made available to all of us, because I think it is really important. We have been fortunate enough here in Charlotte to work with local program partners, and we've offered a variety of programs and resources, and most of our stuff hasn't been sort of reacting to events, except for the few I just mentioned, but more trying to get ahead of things. So we are the summer lunch pickup spot. We have a brown bag lunch program that we put together with the food shelf and the Congregational Church. I think one of the issues in our town is trying to create some level playing fields so that people who might need help don't feel like they have to ask for it, but that we can make it available to everybody. Thanks to the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, we have done some mental health programming and created some databases for patrons to use when they come into the library if they need to access that in a confidential and private way. As far as accessibility, we've worked with Vermont Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired to make sure that our space and our website is accessible, so that's been helpful. During COVID, we were part of a group formed to determine and meet needs in our community, and that was kind of unprecedented, I think, for all of us, I'm sure, to figure out what people need and how we can help. And it was interesting that, this group was wide-ranging, and sort of politics and everything aside, the library, the Grange, the senior center, the local fire department, the local churches, and the food shelf. So that was a big push for us, and I think something that people still remember today. We are a part of our emergency management team in our town, and 2 of our staff members, one of them being me, attend meetings and trainings as this group tries to put together a more robust program for Charlotte. We are also a heating and cooling site for our town, following the recommendations from the Department of Health. And then I just wanted to end with another organization that we're part of, which is the Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, which is based in Massachusetts, and perhaps someone else has spoken about this today, but that organization has a wealth of resources about that specific topic, but I think something that's going to be affecting all of us in Vermont more and more. And it's a great way to connect with people around New England and across the country who are facing similar issues, and how we might all work together. And I think that's one important step is sharing resources. And as Randall mentioned, you know, we are all different kinds of libraries and we're all sort of independent in our towns and cities. But if there's a way to create that, you know, if that's the Department of Libraries or somewhere in the state to create a bank of resources and then follow that up with trainings, I think that would be really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. All right, I'm going to open it up for members of the working group to ask questions of Margaret about what she shared today and what she wrote in her written testimony. Not hearing much from the working group, so I'm going to jump in. I'm wondering, it seems like it was a little bit challenging in some ways to find the right people to speak on various topics that we've heard about today. Thinking about the emergency preparedness and planning aspects, because there are so many different organizations in that space, but each of them are a little bit different, which in a way makes it slight for me, as a newcomer to the state and the region, it's a little bit confusing to figure it out. So we heard from Rachel Onoff from Visara and from, Victarn, did I say that right?
Backdarn.
Backdarn, thank you. And then I'm seeing that there's also Crew, and then we heard from Matthew Ballerman from Sustainable Libraries, and it's a little bit confusing to figure out which is each. And then I know that there's a resilience meeting that members of the department staff go to, in addition to Tom McMurdo being a member of VACDARN. So it's it seems like a very rich area, but there's a lot of overlap between the organizations. Do you have any insight into the purview of each one and how they're different? Or do you find in your work with the various groups that there's overlap or that there's something distinct? And it seems like you're very into this space. And so I'm just curious if you have insight that can help me get oriented to it, yeah. Margaret.
Yeah, I am very interested in it. And I think I think you're right. There is a lot going on, and it's sort of a very active topic. I think, again, kind of thinking about this idea of creating a shared bank of information and I don't know that there's an organization in Vermont that's, you know, has the capacity to take that on, but thinking about like the Sustainable Libraries Initiative or some other organization, because I think everybody wants to make these things successful and useful. I think that's the primary concern. And why, you know, reinvent the wheel? If somebody has figured out something that could be applied from one place to another, let's find out about that. So I think, to me, it's the first step would be gathering the information. And I know that, you know, for instance, as far as I understand it, Rachel Onoff and that, you know, group is, from what I understand, you know, concerned with the preservation of documents and how you keep your collections safe in the event of an emergency. And then we have, how do you keep your space safe, and how do you keep your community safe? And, you know, is the library going to be that safe space for your community if there's a flood or blizzard or whatever might be coming down the road? But I do think there is a lot of overlap, and I think if it could sort of be streamlined, that would really help make things more easily understandable. For instance, if you were going to be writing a grant, not you in particular, but if one were to be writing a grant, and also less intimidating for those of us, you know, Charlotte's a pretty small library, but we're by no means the smallest library. And I feel like if you work in a really small library, this could just seem like, why bother? This is so intimidating. And yet that might be a community where it would be particularly important if the library is the only place in town to get resources. So I think a good thing would be to start with compiling all of that information. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's
No, I think it is helpful. I just added to the possible recommendations for emergency planning, a shared pool of resources for libraries. Maybe it's hard to know if it exists and we just haven't seen, you know, some of us are just not familiar with it, thinking about some of the resources that we heard from Matt Ballerman about. And then also knowing that I think it's the State Library of Rhode Island has been convening these resilience meetings, and that may be part of that effort by state library staff. And so it's, you know, we don't want to duplicate efforts or make a recommendation that would result in something somebody else has already created, rather than referring people to a resource. Developing our own isn't necessarily the best way to do it. So this is an area we'll have to kind of sift
I'm wondering
through more.
if there is a sustainability roundtable, and sustainability is a huge topic, like emergency preparedness and social services. But I'm wondering if that might be a place to start, and I'd be willing to take a look and get in touch with those folks. And I know they work with Matt Ballerman's organization and sort of keep tabs on this kind of thing. So maybe they would know more and at least could point into a direction for where there might be more information.
Well, if you're offering to do legwork for us, I would love your help, Margaret, with the connections that you have to try to find out. And also if you have any, you know, we're also open to suggestions for recommendations. So if you have ideas of like how to frame what the shared resources are that are needed, that would be really helpful to us. And you can just share those with me and I can pass them on to the group. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Did any other working group members have questions for Margaret? They don't, which is
all right. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Margaret. We really appreciate your coming here today.
Thank you.
I believe that our next presenter is here, Cindy Weber from Stowe Public Library.
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Oh,
well, it's 2:15, so we'll give you about 10 minutes to share your thoughts and comments with us, and then we'll open it up for questions from the working group. Thanks for being with us today.
Sure. So I was just asked to be here just yesterday. So I've written this report, and I could have sent a written report to you guys, but I wasn't, I didn't have the time to do that. So I'll just read it off, and hopefully it all makes sense. And I share the emotion that Randall was showing, that this is a trying time for all of us in public libraries. So I'm Cindy Weber, the director of the Stowe Free Library. I've overseen the Stowe Free Library, a much beloved municipal library, for the past 11 years. The library is located within the town village in a historic Greek Revival building. Established as a school in 1863 and renovated as a public library in 1981. The library was founded in 1866 and was said to have been previously located in a village inn, a storefront, in a town administrative building. The town of Stowe is a destination for adventurous and tourists from the four corners of the world, as well as home to true Vermonters, as defined to me, an original Midwestern flatlander, by the number of generation families have lived in Vermont, and more specifically in the community of Stowe. The town, with a population of 5,223, which has increased by 20% since the pandemic, includes several religious denominations, independent businesses, forests, farms, preserved lands, restaurants, schools, recreational areas, community organizations, and more. As you would expect, being what others would view as a gold town, the library is well supported by the community. The library has a healthy budget, a supportive and collaborative board of trustees, a staff of 5 full-time professionals, and a generous friends group. The library offers many materials, resources, and services to community members, Stowe residents, library members, and visitors alike. The library is a valued asset in the Stowe community, but it competes financially with the many demands put upon the municipality from its constituents who desire a safe, healthy, sustainable, beautiful, educated, and inviting community. Working in a public library, the Stowe Free Library staff encounter patrons of all walks of life, the young and the old, the struggling reader to the lifelong learners, the well-to-do and the not so well-off, the healthy and the suffering, the employed and the unemployed, the business owners and the seasonal workers, the homeowners and the homeless. Yes, the town of Stowe has unsheltered individuals within its community. Their homes are essentially the forest, the walking trail, and the shelter its picturesque bridges provide. And their meals are provided by the leftovers carelessly thrown in trash cans and dumpsters. I have met many homeless individuals in this exceptional library from the very first day I started working there. We had a local gentleman who graced our library for years with his voracious literary appetite, which we gladly fed with a library owned and donated works of fiction, many times not returned, but we were happy to do what we could. He lived on the walking trail, and I suspect sometimes on the library lawn, frequently migrating to other communities or spending time in the Veterans Hospital, until his recent demise, which was widely publicized in the local papers. Another time, an extremely exhausted and disheveled young mother who had been living in the woods stopped in with a crying baby. My youth librarian took it upon herself to hold the baby while the mother took a nap. She started sleeping in a chair, but then spread herself out on the floor in our periodical room. Word spread through the community about one in need, and a police officer stopped into the library to check on her. He provided some assistance through his connection with social services. Occasionally, we would see other homeless individuals who we knew by name, who frequented the Stowe Free Library periodically. This winter, all of our regulars and a few newly established regulars had converged in Stowe and the library. Currently, my staff and I know at least 6 homeless individuals by name, and they may all visit the library on any given day. At the beginning of February, with the weather conditions reaching negative temperatures, community members voiced concern about the homeless individuals to the town manager and the town select board members. The Stowe Free Library was designated as a warming station for the remainder of that week. We kept the building open for an extended amount of time, allowing individuals to congregate in our lobbies. The library was open as normal, and the homeless gladly entered for an extended stay. For the first time ever, we received a visit from 2 representatives of the Lamoille Shelter Organization and the United Way of Lamoille County, and received offers of assistance by a local rabbi, a local pastor, and their congregational volunteers. The staff handled most of the situation, but one of the representatives spoke for several hours to one individual who strongly denied the offer of bed and comfort in a local shelter. I spoke with the representatives and voiced my gratitude for their appearance and the concerns the staff and I have had. The representatives gave me their contact information, which made me hopeful. We have had increasing concerns about the homeless individuals and their impact on services we provide. They arrive with an abundance of personal possessions, including a sharpened walking stick. We advise them to keep clear of access to materials and services, but one had a verbal confrontation with a patron regarding her possessions, blocking access to the public computers, and later accused another patron of being rude to her, while the same patron made the same complaint against her. Several have arrived with differing malodorous scents, a deep scent of wood smoke, a lingering smell of mold and mildew, and a combination of these along with extreme body odor. Patrons have complained and been obvious about avoiding areas the homeless are occupying within our library. This week, one repeatedly hit himself in the face. But when the police were called for his own safety, he replied that he was fine and gave no indication to the police officer that this event even occurred. The same individual likes to occupy all the nooks and crannies of the building, from the elevator to the bathroom to the basement entryway. Many ramble on about the injustices of the world. One likes to change his clothes in the lobby. All of them appear to be fighting mental issues and addictions. I reached out to the agency representatives for advice on how to address these issues. Regarding personal hygiene, I was told that public showers were being considered, but it may take up to a year for them to be installed. I was offered sanitary wipes. I was expecting more assistance in a timely manner, but one email sent out was not responded to in almost a week. Calls are unanswered. I know that these individuals and organizations are busy dealing with the many things that we are dealing with, but I feel more needs to be done to help them and to relieve the stress it is putting on the communities and my staff. I'm working with the town manager and others within the municipality to come up with some plan going forward, but I wonder how much this burden should be on the municipalities, and specifically librarians who are not trained in social work. My staff do their very best to treat everyone equally and cordially, but we are experiencing burnout with what our own stressors and staff turnover since the epidemic. Libraries are known to be the third place beyond work and home where communities gather for quiet reflection, learning, and socialization. Libraries are open to all. We strongly believe in the tenets of intellectual freedom and equal access. We're happy to welcome all. We go above and beyond to recommend resources when needed or requested, but we do not have any resources to provide these individuals. The only resources we have right now are warm space and the town's emergency personnel, who work in a town department that are understaffed. This extreme situation has arrived at a time when the library was not prepared. We do not have policies or protocols to deal with the odors, the disruptions, the passive aggressive behavior, the number of possessions, the mental illnesses, the addictions. I am reaching out to other libraries to see what policies they may have, but I find it overwhelming because I know that policies must reflect equality and fairness, but there are so many nuances with this issue. Social services are needed within libraries and frankly, everywhere in the state. People are hurting. It's a disservice to them to let this continue. I know that we are the land of the free, but some individuals are freer than others. The homeless are bound by their fears, their addictions, their illnesses. Library staff are ill-equipped to deal with their demons. I thank Vermont and the working groups for taking on this assessment of public libraries and all the aspects thereof. And I appreciate the time you have given to listen to the many testimonies regarding library services in the great state of Vermont. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
You're welcome. It's very emotional. It's very hard when you want to solve everybody's problems, when you want to give resources, when you want to help, but there's nothing you can do. And then you feel for your own safety and the safety of your staff.
It's a difficult thing to balance the important aspects of welcoming everyone to the space and making the space available and making the resources available and to having everyone see the space as a place for them, and then also having shared norms for using the space when everybody's coming in from a different perspective. And holding those two together is very challenging, and having many years of working in an urban library environment, even though we had social services, working in San Francisco, we had one of the first social workers, I think the first social worker in a library in the country. And when the city's housing resources changed, it went from we were able to place our library patrons, maybe 200 a year, we were able to get them from our library social workers and health and safety associates into housing, to we just had to say there is no housing.
Yes.
And we're so sorry. And that was a very strange thing because people were used to coming for that connection with that resource. So I definitely, what you were saying resonated with my past experience in a very different library environment, but it's something that we're all dealing with at this point. And thinking about too that so many families are now experiencing homelessness, that the number of families and families with children has increased, as we heard a couple of working group sessions ago from some of our one of our local groups that serves and advocates for people experiencing homelessness. So it's very challenging. Andy, I want to give you a chance to ask questions or make comments.
I mean, it's more of a statement, I guess, than a question. But thank you, Cindy. I can imagine how hard this is. So, and just I mean, essentially, it's like the library in Stowe has become a de facto drop-in center, right?
It has. Mm-hmm.
And it sucks that I mean that's the position you're being put in without being able to actually provide the support people get in places like that, actual drop-in centers. And also, it's an interesting sort of example of how small towns in Vermont, no matter how wealthy they may be, are being challenged by need right now. And it's just unfortunate you guys are caught in the middle as the public space that can provide the services.
Right.
So it's I feel for you totally.
Thank you.
I really do. And that's sort of more what I wanted to say. But
I appreciate that. We're trying to do the best that we can. I know that my the town manager is on board with me right now, and we're working with the police department and trying to figure out some policies and protocols to put in place. But it's very difficult, and so we're doing the best we can.
And one key is often to focus on behaviors that are, focusing not on the people, but on the behavior that can't take place in the library. But
yes,
it is definitely challenging to do that.
Right.
And especially if you don't have resources locally, there may be an odor issue that's emanating from somebody's clothes, not necessarily even from their body, and if there aren't clothes for them in the community, then what? And if there's not a shower facility, then what? It's very challenging. Wendy?
So, Cindy, what do you need next to get you further along the road, to make you feel safer, to make you be able to provide the services for your patrons?
Well, I feel like there is a lack of services in Lemuel County right now, because we have there was a building that was bought to be opened as a shelter in Lemuel County, and there's legal actions against them doing that. So, even the fact that, hopefully there'll be a shower somewhere close that we can send people to do, that just seems like a long time down the road. So I think the only thing that I can think of right now is to just make people aware, and then work with our community and work with other libraries to do some policies and protocols and put them in place. And I'm trying to encourage my staff as much as possible that I'm trying to move this along and trying to get things in working order for them to feel more safe and more strengthened by knowledge and resources. But it's a slow go. So I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Looks like we have one more question from Jeanette Bear.
Hi, Cindy.
Hello, Jeanette.
Feel you're hurt. And I'm just wondering if certainly in libraries with more than one staff person, if when looking at resumes, instead of looking for MLSs, that we shouldn't be hiring social workers. If you've got a background in social work, you can pick up what you need to know, just like most people learn on the job. I'm seeing a great need for trained social service folks, at our front desks.
Yes. Well, I personally feel like, we have gone through our education and we're well equipped to run a library. We're not well equipped to run social service things for individuals. I don't think that, that should be on us anymore. I don't think that should be the onus of librarians. If the state could provide social services within each library, or if the state would pick up on the social services provided for these individuals, that would immensely help. But I just don't feel like we are asked to do so much. And in the little time that we have, and I do have 5 staff members, but they are constantly working. And it's just another thing that's added onto her plate that I just don't think is fair. I don't think it's fair.
And I think that's one of the dangers of libraries wanting to be everything for everybody and fill every need, that
Yeah.
we've brought some of it on ourselves instead of we're just the place with the books.
Right. I think that we're all
There's gotta be a line there somewhere that we can draw.
Yeah, I think that we're all empaths. We're very empathetic to individuals. We do well at that. We're just not equipped with resources to handle those with, you know, mental issues or anything else that's causing them to have behaviors that are not normal. So,
And
I
if
don't
it's a
know.
if it's a problem in Stowe and a problem in Woodstock, it's problem for every Vermont library.
Everywhere. That's exactly right. So we're failing them somehow. It's not just it's not the libraries that are failing them, because we're doing the best that we can. We're failing them somewhere else.
Well, with that, I need to move us on to our next topic, which is actually our prior topic. Josh Muse is going to share a presentation with us about the impacts of COVID-19 on libraries. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh. And thank you so much, Cindy, for being with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the time to spend with you.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you to everybody who's presented today. A lot of interesting and intense conversations. This is going to be more of a more sort of statistical focus. We're talking about, because we thought it was part of this important part of this topic, we're going to do a quick overview of impacts on public libraries for because of COVID-19. And so I'm going to try to skim through this pretty quickly, but we'll definitely have time for questions in the back once we get there. So you all may remember this, one of these very early signs from the beginning of the COVID epidemic. Let's see, when people were still figuring things out, which lasted, a while at this point. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Okay, so we, as Jeanette talked about this morning, the things that the department were involved in to try to help where we could, try to give advice and structure to things where possible. But I'm focusing sort of on the data that we collected while the pandemic was going on. So we got some anecdotal information early on, but this is kind of our first survey, which was basically who is offering curbside, because for the most part, almost everyone closed, and then they reopened as staff only, and then eventually people reopened as curbside. So this was May 28th. This is the information that we got, who was doing what. This was 75 responses. Our responses would expand as the year went along. Okay, so that was our first question. Our second questionnaire, which got a lot more developed, asked a bunch of questions. What was your status? What services are you offering? And so on. So our first one of those was in June 26th. So things had developed a little bit. People were getting a little more used to what was going on. But this is what we saw for folks at that point, who was open, who was not open. We also asked some additional questions, and for example, discovered how many people had staff who were laid off or furloughed, and who was offering virtual programming at the time. We'll talk more about that in a second. So this is a broader one. This is covering the entirety of 2020. So this shows what people's status was, who's closed entirely, staff only, etc. by appointment. What you can see is that things were, I guess, sort of progressing fairly well until once everybody got kind of used to it in the middle of the summer. Things were kind of progressing. People were opening. People were by appointment, and then we hit November, and everything got bad. Basically, there was a huge retraction in the number of libraries that were open, and this sort of went down. The next one will show you what happened after that, but clearly there was an arc that went. Oh, sorry. I'll get back to that. So one of the other things we worked on was public Wi-Fi, and a lot of libraries were doing the same thing. So at the same time, we were working with the Department of Public Service. They were trying to figure out where there was public Wi-Fi throughout the state. Suddenly, this was increasingly important when libraries were and other places weren't open. And so we were working with them to come up with a list of where everybody was, and a ton of you libraries were helping us get the list together, but also libraries were doing everything they could to try to expand their Wi-Fi access for people. This both meant because suddenly the signal in the parking lot was suddenly so much more important than it had ever been before. So libraries were, in some cases, rejiggering what they had, were in some cases adding new equipment, and also were maybe leaving the Wi-Fi on when they had not been doing it before. So we were trying to track this. We were working with public service, and also we were trying to, they had a couple of different programs to add access points to the outside of buildings to try to increase the signal strength out there. So this was a big thing, particularly in 2020 and into 2021, everybody trying to optimize their Wi-Fi experience. Okay, so this shows you what happened when we got into 2021. So again, this is, I guess, how maybe what we're used to now. It looks like things are great, and then we shoot on down, and then the gradual and seemingly long-term move upwards, where by the end of 2021, most libraries were open and sort of in their kind of static, general, normal, open situation. 2022 I didn't include because it's been pretty much static throughout that. Okay, so here's another one. And we didn't do this initially, obviously, because it was required, but we shortly after the mask mandate started disappearing, we started asking people what they were doing, because there was a significant amount of variance. And you can see this is what we have for the entire period since we started asking, with required, and I sort of lumped these together. There was a lot of granularity in our questions, a lot of different, like 4 different kinds of required and 4 different kinds of recommended. I lumped them together to make this chart more understandable. But this shows that as the way it's developed over the pandemic, and as things sort of started to get back to close to normal. Okay, so this is another one that we added later on when this started to be a thing that was happening, that people were revisiting indoor programming. So we were trying to track who was doing it, and then in many cases they were doing it in sort of a narrow range, and weren't in. They were either, I think there were examples of both. People were only doing certain kids programs and under certain controlled environments, or they were only doing adults and they didn't have kids in it. And then gradually, as time went on, there was more consistency throughout the state. Okay, so these are 2 things that people pivoted to, I will say, very quickly when the pandemic hit. Everybody was closed. Suddenly they were open for staffing, but for example, programming, except for maybe outdoors, and especially initially, I think outdoors even had concerns. So people moved to virtual very fast, a thing that had been sort of an afterthought for most libraries beforehand. I think it was pretty infrequent that there was a lot of virtual programming, and everybody had to pivot super fast. These are the numbers of libraries that were offering virtual programming. The second one is people who, when their indoor space was no longer working, who basically were lending libraries to use out on the lawn. Lending computers to use out on the lawn. This wasn't something that everybody did, but it was definitely something that I think nobody had done really before the pandemic. So it was, I thought, one of the more interesting solutions. And some libraries still use this approach. There's also libraries who offer it to go home, but this was more of the borrow it for a couple of hours model and just be on the property. Also a way to access the Wi-Fi that you're offering. So COVID forced a lot of people to do things that maybe they hadn't thought of before. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I really should have opened with this. What we're looking at is public library stats, because that's what I have. Unfortunately, we don't have good information on how this impacted other libraries, except that in many cases, things were, I think, more consistent. I think schools tended to be doing more similar things. There was more diversity in the libraries. But again, I don't have good things to back up any anecdotal information there. So I apologize for that. And I should have opened with that. Okay, so lastly, I have a couple here of stats from the annual reports. And so these are things that I wanted to show off exactly the difference, a sort of tangible difference as soon as the pandemic hit. So what we have here is I broke out libraries by their fiscal years in the report, because depending on your fiscal year, your pandemic experience on any given year looked very different. For example, the January to December libraries had in 2020 had 9 months of not a lot, whereas the July to June ones only had a couple of months. So that's why they're broken out. What we can see is for hours open and visits is it just craters, obviously. It drops like a rock. And that I wish I had the next year's 2022 data yet, because I think that would show everything popping back up. But right now we're just seeing, this is just showing the downward trend. Okay, so that's open hours and visits. Next one is physical and electronic circulation. So what you see is a significant drop in physical circ, not as much as visits or hours, but still a significant drop. Clearly, again, people segue to curbside very quickly, even though that's something that most people didn't offer, and really mitigated that. I think kept that number from dropping where it would have otherwise, but clearly, if anybody is looking at library numbers and is not thinking about COVID for the last 2 years, then you're not understanding the numbers at all. Okay, so this is physical circ, electronic circ. We definitely see the gradual incline, and this has sort of been a thing that's been going on for a while, but I think it did tick up a little bit more in the pandemic period when it was harder to get physical books. But yes, so that's that one. One more of these is programming. It tells a story that's not too dissimilar from the first one, hours and visits, which is it dropped like a rock for the in-person ones, but we'd see the uptick of virtual, which we were never tracking before because it by and large wasn't a big thing. Yeah, again, the big takeaway is COVID had an enormous impact on what people accomplished, and people did a great job making it work. That is a very short summary of that. And if anybody has questions, please feel free.
Thank you, Josh. Just a note on something Josh shared, which is that we don't have the fiscal year 22 data yet for public libraries. Josh is conducting the public library survey right now, and every single set of survey information we've given you has to be updated. And that's one reason that we're not putting the department reports on to the web page, because they're not really the final numbers that will be in there. We'll also be trying to do some longitudinal charts for folks, so you can kind of see, you might see dips on that, like you saw with the dips on openness. Along with not being open, there are impacts to programs in many cases, and also to collection circulation. Christopher?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really interested to see the 2022 data, and we collect data too here at Vermont Humanities on public programming, and it's not anywhere near as extensive as what you've got, but I think one of the things that we see in the arts and culture organizations is that the comeback has been super slow across genres and venues, and in some cases I think the audiences that we had coming to our libraries for programming are permanently switched to virtual, and those audiences are not going to come back. And I'm interested if the data that you're seeing is potentially mirroring that, or are there more signs of hope that people are going to want to be together in person?
Yeah, I'll be really interested in seeing that as well. I think I have a lot of I've heard a lot of anecdotal stuff about that, that totally meshes with what you're saying. But I'll be curious to see what the sort of statewide absolute numbers look like, and see if it varies place to place or not.
The most common comment in our evaluation forms now is, please keep our Zoom programs going. We're not going to go back out.
Gotcha. That's intense, but yeah. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments or anything for Josh before we move to our final conversation on, which is the discussion of the working group on social services? All right, thank you, Josh. I really appreciate your gathering this information. We are about to stop doing the, I think we may have done our last survey because nothing is really changing in the survey right now. So I think this is sort of the end of that, what was once a weekly and then became a monthly survey of what services people are providing. Folks are kind of flatlined for a while now. Am I correct in that, Josh?
Yes, yeah, that's my sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Josh. So working group members, we've got our discussion on the topic of social services now. And one thing I do want to mention to folks on both topics, I mentioned Monica Antonoli's resource. Josh, were you able to stop sharing? I don't know how to, if I can force that.
Yes, sorry, no,
Okay, that's okay, thanks.
It's being persnickety.
There are some materials that we had that we didn't hear testimony from people, and one of them is related to this morning's topic of emergency preparedness. And it really is worth the time of going into some of these links, particularly, even though it's a little old, it's about a decade old, but the Librarian's Disaster Planning and Community Resiliency Guidebook, Librarians Fulfilling Their Role as Information First Responders from the New Jersey State Library in 2013. Also, there's a 2019 article called Ports in a Storm, the Role of the Public Library in Times of Crisis. And then there's just some general FEMA information and natural disaster tables, so you can kind of see how things are trending. So there's that resource, which came from an email, and I just made it into a list for our testimony page. Then there's also testimony from Barbara Ball, the director at Windsor Public Library, and from Catherine Goldsmith, the director at Starksboro. So let's talk about social services and what we heard today and what recommendations we might want to consider coming out of that or in response to that. Andy.
I mean, one of the sort of sad things about this is that the testimony is so focused, and I don't think we can't generalize from it, is my necessarily, because of the small pool. But so, like, my argument would be there's more research that needs to be done eventually to sort of scope out this issue more comprehensively.
Mm-hmm.
I also think we have to define what we mean by social services, and how it's distinct from emergency preparedness and emergency response, and how, like Randall was saying, where it begins and where it ends, because in a lot of the testimony there were those people, tax forms and tax support were being treated as a social service. I don't object to that, but on one end, and providing supervision to children and dealing with mentally ill patrons and homeless patrons on another extreme. So to figure out what we mean by social services is probably important too. The other thing I'm curious about is this idea of the distinctions between smaller like who are the most impacted by the needs for the more extreme demands of social services? Is it population centers like Rutland and Brownell? Stowe is clearly affected too, though. Like, so what are the variables that result in pressure on a library to be a front line in providing those support services? Those are things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Wendy?
One of the things that that Cindy was basically asking for was social services provided by the state. And so something about that ought to go into the report somewhere. She didn't define what social services she wanted, but it was that's a direct quote from what she's just asked for.
Andy, I think that's a new hand.
Yeah, it's a new hand. I'm sorry to be the pest, but
No, you're not.
I mean, Wendy pointed out something too that came up in that discussion with Cindy, whereas there's this tension between, do we equip staff at libraries with the skills to address these needs better, even just to mitigate them long enough for there to be support that comes in from outside? Or do we emphasize the support from the outside, right? Like, because that seemed to be part of that discussion, and a tension within people who are present, at this meeting as to what the appropriate course of action is.
And Randall also seemed to be saying that there weren't enough trainers to do the training. So, and I'm sorry, Kelly, I butted in there.
Kelly?
No, that's fine. There are actually a lot of libraries in more urban areas that have social workers actually on staff. Not that I support or discourage either way, but I don't think the system is such that it can be fixed as quickly as we possibly need it to be. So I don't think it's a bad idea to offer training to library staff. I don't think we can afford to get social workers on staff, but I definitely think, training for staff on de-escalation or, things such as that would be definitely a good suggestion.
Yeah, I'm putting my hand up because I feel like there's something very complicated here, even in terms of what to put down as on this list of possible recommendations for me. Right now, I'm finding something, it's really becoming challenging because I can't pretend to understand what social services are already provided in Vermont by the state or other social service agencies. I think to say that there aren't social services then doesn't seem to make sense. I mean, I'm across the street right now from a building filled with social services in Barrie. There are regional centers focused on social services all around the state, I think. I don't know if there's
health services.
I'm sorry?
There aren't sufficient mental health services.
There aren't, it's hard to hear you, Kelly. There aren't sufficient mental health services?
Yes.
Have there been cuts to them in the past?
I don't know
4 or
if there have
5
been
years?
cuts, but definitely COVID caused things to be bottlenecked.
Okay. So there could be some, that could be a COVID related impact maybe in that field that's impacting us. I mean, I think when we're talking about social services, it's interesting to me because I thought we would hear about a whole breadth of social services, but we're mainly hearing about mental health and homelessness, which are not necessarily the same group. And I do want to be careful about that. Not everyone who is homeless experiences mental health issues. And some of us who experience mental health issues are not homeless. And some of our patrons who exhibit problems in the library are not homeless. They might present with some hygiene issues, but they may not actually be homeless. So we need to be careful about that. So it could be that there are some COVID-related access to social services issues that are having a downstream effect on libraries. Do you think that's something that's fair to think of as we're framing it?
I think it's an open consideration. Yeah. You know, I mean, there are a variety of factors and and to be clear, I'm no expert on this topic. Just with work, we've been involved in a project with Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, which has opened up knowing a lot more than I did before about how overtaxed the social welfare system is. And and it's not like the state necessarily deploys people. The state seems to deploy money to agencies. So where those agencies are overtaxed or where they're not present, there are no resources.
I'm not sure whose hand was up first, Wendy or Jeanette.
Well, I'll just say mine very quickly, and then I'll let Jeanette go afterwards. Thank you, Jeanette. What we are finding is that because all the agencies are struggling with their own level of staffing, they can't provide the support that the library may need. And that is, I don't know, partially due to retirements, partially due to people moving on, partially due to everything else that is partially due to COVID. But we can ring up for assistance and we don't get a response because the police are off on another drug bust. So we don't get a response in our library, and that's the way it is. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Jeanette?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the majority of libraries in Vermont are located in villages where there are absolutely no social service agencies or individuals available. That your closest agency might be over the mountain and through the woods.
Yeah, I mean, and take a place like Stowe where there was probably no perceived need for that, in the past.
It is interesting though, because I think sometimes we think that these problems or these challenges are new. And historically, I don't think that they are. We may be experiencing them at a higher rate right now, just like we're kind of seeing more road rage right now. But librarians have always been providing a social safety net of sorts. It's part of what I've been doing since I started working in libraries. And I certainly remember going to libraries in Vermont as a kid and seeing people experiencing homelessness sitting in the library all day. It's always been here with us. It seems like it's reached a crescendo and our staff there are some behaviors where like the staff are really challenged, but I'm not sure that this is a new thing that has come our way. Like,
I don't believe it's new, but I do believe it's more frequently found.
And I would suggest the nature of it has probably changed too, particularly in smaller communities where the guy who had no place to live was known to everybody, and was probably from the community in a lot of cases. that's just speculative, and furthermore, I think the impacts of drugs right now are it's pretty enormous, which is just feeding it.
Denise?
I actually have to leave for another meeting, which ironically is about staff burnout. And I wonder, I mean, there's been a lot of sessions and professional development webinars, and actually the recent ACRL conference I was at about staff burnout. And a lot of it has to do with COVID and post-COVID and all of that. And I'm wondering if there's also a relationship between what we're talking about and what may already exist with staff burnout, and just really accentuates that feeling as well, possibly.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good point. I want to close out our meeting as close as possible to the time that we're supposed to close at 3 o'clock, but I want to check in with folks about some of the recommendations on this before we end. So if you're able, those of you who are able to stay a few minutes later, I'll just read some of the things I heard to get the conversation going, and then people can add to them or say, Kathy, that I didn't hear what you heard. Take that off the list. You can always tell me to take something off the list. Today I heard that it would be good to have behavioral guidelines that foster welcoming environments, that it would be good to have some recognition that libraries are part of the social safety net and the intervention team in a community, even in incorporated libraries. It would be good to have some training resources to support library staff in responding to community members in crisis, including knowledge of social services available outside the library and also de-escalation techniques. That there's a challenge with libraries being used, and this one is so not new. As a children's librarian, I will say this one is so perennial. The de facto childcare that we provide in public libraries after school and in the summer, and that unresolved social services issues can easily become public safety matters. I don't know what the recommendation is there, but that seems to be something that is sort of maybe an underlying issue. And then just a couple things to keep in mind, that rural communities have limited access to social services, and that low staffing levels and COVID changes may be having an impact on Vermonters' ability to get help from social services, which then is impacting the demand for those services and the demand for those supports in the libraries. Are there other things we should be putting on this list? And bear in mind, we'll be talking about safety, which dovetails with this in another meeting, but anything that we should add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think about it a little more.
Okay. I do want to share, we should probably have a way for you all to share. Why don't you, I want to just invite you, if you think of a recommendation, like you're taking a shower, you're making lunch, you're driving down the highway, a recommendation strikes you, go to a place where you can use your device, write it down in a notebook, and maybe start sharing those recommendations with me, because I have a little bit of a worry that we're going to lose them, that each of us is thinking of them and that we might lose them. So just know, if you have a recommendation that you'd like the working group to consider on any topic, that you can, once you've had it germinate a little bit, you can shoot it my way. And I can gather those up, and then we can have them kind of by topic that we look at. Okay. I think we're all exhausted now. I do have a little bit of a concern that next month's meeting could be even more. We might get more people wanting to provide comment. It might be a good idea to just plan that we are going to be here a little bit longer. I don't want to start before 9 o'clock because that is not lenient with me. I'm not a morning person, and it would be terrible for all of you. But we might need to go later in the day, like till 4. Okay, I think we can we can, if somebody will move to adjourn, I think then we can second it and then I can adjourn. I think I could probably adjourn anyway. Christopher waved his hand. Christopher's moving to adjourn. Who wants to second that? Wendy's waving her arms around. Karen is too. Okay, all in favor of adjourning now at 3:07. Everybody's waving and making, it looks crazy for the record, but for the record, everybody's articulating aye, and anybody who has a nay, please say it now. All right, thank you all for your attention, time, and commitment to this process and today's meeting. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.